Hi everyone, it's great to be here. I would like to start by thanking the droidcon Zagreb crew here for inviting me. That was really, really nice. I've been wanting to go here for a long time. I haven't been to Zagreb before. I've been to Croatia before a couple of times. So, yep, now I covered most of your country. It's great here.
It's not that small. You can say that in Slovenian.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So I hope you had a great time yesterday. Watched a lot of interesting sessions that were great. And there are going to be a lot of really great sessions today as well. So let's move on. First, let me do another introduction of myself. I'm a freelance software developer. I know that on my profile on the website it says I work for Bontouch. I left that company just days ago actually to start my own, so now I'm a freelance developer. I live in Stockholm, in Sweden. We don't have so many polar bears on the street, that's a myth. But it's much colder than here. I used to work for Ericsson, and then I worked for Sony Mobile, doing their phones. And I've also been working at Spotify and some other companies. I've been doing Android basically since it came out, was announced by Google. So that gives me a lot of experience with that platform. And thanks to drinking a lot of coffee, I had time to write a book about it. So yeah. So please, if you haven't read the book or if you haven't gotten it, maybe it will be interesting. It's a little bit dated now maybe, but I'd love to hear more about what your experience of Android development is. So after this session, please come talk to me. I'd love to hear more. If you tell me something really cool and interesting, it might end up in the next book, who knows. Okay, let's get started with what we're going to talk about. 10 common mistakes. 10 is a nice round number, so let's do that. The first one, I say people are different. So when you sit and develop your Android application, you sit by your desk with your phone next to you, plugged into your computer. You usually have one of the high-end phones because, well, you're an Android developer and you want the high-end devices. So it's a big screen and fast CPU and everything. This is where we do the first common mistakes. People are different in the full sense of it. Android as a platform has really embraced this. There are Android devices in all kinds of sizes and shapes and performances and price ranges and such. And as developers, we often forget this, so we focus on one thing. The first thing that people are doing by mistake is ignoring this one. Who here have been focusing on accessibility in their application? I see 2 hands there. 1, 2, 3. Okay, 5 people. Great. So, but you think like, okay, there's such a small user group and it's such a big effort to invest here. No, first of all, it's a small effort to invest in accessibility for your application. And by doing accessibility focused on your application, you will actually improve the overall user experience and make all users happy. Who here knows someone who's visually impaired? Colorblind maybe? I'm colorblind. I have a lot of problem with many applications because the color scheme is wrong. That's an accessibility thing you should think about. So yeah, focus on that one. Now, we could talk about accessibility all day. I'm not. Instead, I would recommend you to go look at another session from droidcon Berlin last year by my friend Kelly Schuster, Accessibility in Action. Very, very good talk explaining how to do it and the way to approach it. So go have a look at that one and bring that home when you leave from this conference. The next thing here is like the number of form factors available. This is a great picture from the app developer for OpenSignal, which is a quite popular Android application. Anyone seen this one before? Yeah, so it's part of a very big statistics presentation he does about his app every year. And these are the different form factors that are used for his application. So the different apps, the different devices that run his app. It's a huge mess. And usually, we as Android developers, we just focus on a portrait mode for a smartphone device. We don't care about the other sizes or the other rotations. So if you're doing this, stop doing that immediately. Anyone see the mistake here? Screen orientation portrait. Who here is doing this today? Yeah, right. Now, this is a really common mistake. And why is this important? Well, if you do your application so that it actually works in both landscape and portrait and on small and large screens up to tablet size, you will avoid a lot of problems in the future. Who here has tried the Android N preview? Have anyone tried the multi-window feature in the Android N? Yeah. So does anyone know here what the multi-window feature will mean for your application? It will force your application to go into landscape mode when the phone is in portrait, and vice versa. So now you must handle it. Otherwise, your application will look really weird. Second thing that people are mistaken, cross-platform. Who's doing cross-platform development? A couple of you? Okay. So cross-platform came up like, yeah, we have the two major platforms, iOS and Android. So we want to write once and run it on all of those. It's a great promise. We did it for the web. Now we're going to do it for mobile devices for native. It's a balance between one code base to rule them all, or focusing on performance and platform compliance. Excuse me. Now, there are many options for doing cross-platform, so these are some of them. Anyone doing React Native? Well, I would have expected more. So there's React Native, which is like the Facebook thing. There's Xamarin, now bought by Microsoft, where you write in C#. Cordova, which is basically just a wrapped web view. And anyone know what the little butterfly in the corner is? That's called Flutter. It comes from Google. You write in Dart. It's also one of these. Now, the problem with all of these is that they're just placed on top of each native platform, and adds another dependency on top of that with a promise of you just have to write once, which we know is not true. There is always corner cases where you have to cover for Android or iOS. So the promises here are kind of vague. So the first option you should consider when it comes to cross-platform are these two. So who here does any web development as well? So have you checked the latest stuff in HTML5? I go back and look at HTML5 specs and the additions they do there every now and then. I'm getting amazed about how cool stuff they're adding there. And also there was a talk about NDK yesterday. C++ today is not the C++ we learned in university. So let's start with HTML5. Anyone know what the service workers in HTML5 is? This basically solves the problem of running stuff in the background for web apps. So now you can actually write apps that are on a very high level comparable to what native Android apps are. And it works on all the browsers. It's great. It's very similar to how web workers work, but they keep running after you close the web page. So maybe your next app, if you want it to run on all platforms, should be HTML5 instead. Very controversial to say in an Android conference, I know. Google has named this progressive web apps, which is like their name for the whole suite of new stuff they have added. So I recommend you all to check this out so you know what it's all about, because I think this will be more and more important as we move ahead in the app community. Now, C++ is becoming really cool. When I learned C++, it did not look like this. It was much, much more cumbersome to write. And thanks to our good friends at JetBrains, there is now also modern IDEs called CLion that works pretty much like Android Studio. So now you can do, using the auto keyword in C++, you don't have to write so much declaration anymore. You can use lambdas. And there is even strongly typed enums, very much like we do in Java. So all of this makes C++ a much better candidate these days for cross-platform development if you want to share code between iOS and Android. So when you think of cross-platform, don't think of these React Native, Xamarin, and stuff in the first hand. Instead, HTML5 or C++. They come from two different ends of the need for development. Now, who here is happy with their build times? Now, in my team, if my team members would be doing this while they're waiting for the compilation to go, I would be happy because that means they're moving and exercising and stay healthy. Unfortunately, they're not. They're probably on Facebook or playing Candy Crush. So this is a problem because most builds, how many here have build times that are like a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, something? Yeah, right? Anyone went to the Gradle talk yesterday? Lots of really good tips there. I think you can find the same talk online on YouTube. So if it's just 2 or 3 minutes, it's not long enough to start doing something else. So you will just sit there and stare into the screen, or, well, Facebook mostly, I guess. So this is something you need to address. Anyone run this command before? Adding -- profile to your Gradle? Yeah? This is a great way to start, to figure out what is taking time in your build. So you run this, it will output an HTML file that looks like this. And you can go through this one and drill down to what the exact step that actually takes time, fix that thing, and make sure that you cut down your build times. I am usually not satisfied until my incremental builds are less than 10 seconds. Anyone can beat that? Yes, you can. Just do this, and you will be there. Now, this will fix the build times for each developer on his own computer, but you're all doing pull requests, right? You're using GitHub or something like that, and do pull requests and code reviews. Maybe you have a continuous integration running and doing tests meanwhile. No? Sounds familiar? So don't forget that the lead time for that pull request, how long it takes for your continuous integration to verify everything, to do the static analysis, to run the unit test, etc. That also counts as build times. If that is very long, if each developer have to wait for an hour before the continuous integration has verified their commit, you will slow down the development process. So make sure you speed up this as well. Split it up, do whatever, maybe remove some of the tests or something for each pull request here and run them separately instead. But make sure it doesn't take too much time so it impacts your team's performance. Everybody's writing tests. What's your testing strategy? Do you do full TDD? Is it do you write like instrumentation tests for everything, or is it just unit tests? Maybe you're using Roboelectric. Well, there's many things you can do, and usually we tend to have like an ad hoc strategy here. We hear that TDD is good, so we start doing unit tests. But then we realize we have a lot of mocking to do, so we start using Roboelectric. And then we find out that Roboelectric doesn't really work for everything, so we start doing instrumentation tests, and suddenly we have a whole mess of different types of tests. Make a strategy. First of all, write tests, but focus on writing one type of tests. Remember, TDD, or unit tests, that's to help you design good code. That's not to help you find bugs in the existing code. That will be very hard to do. But start writing tests. I think unit tests are great to do, but if you want a test strategy, you should add something else as well. So there is such a thing as too much tests. It will slow down your development. First of all, if you have to run them all the time, there's code that has to be maintained and things like that. And this usually comes from not having a good test strategy. So the first thing you should think of is to measure everything, just as you measure your build performance. Evaluate what you get from there, and then repeat this over and over again. Don't just do it once. Do it like every other sprint or something when you develop, and make sure that you address the issues you have. If you see that this test doesn't really make sense anymore, remove it. Maybe you don't need that type of test. Automation is the key to this. So make sure that you find a way to automate all your tests. You don't have to run them manually. Because when you have to run them manually, we tend to forget to do it. We run them wrong, they might be flaky, etc., etc. Once you have everything automated, it will make your life much easier, and you will get much more value from your tests. So there's one tip I have here. Have anyone here heard about Calabash testing framework? Yes. It's very interesting. I just started using it. I'm very happy with it. I kind of like stopped writing instrumentation tests when I found this one. So I just have unit tests, and then I write these. Really nice. Context leaks. Never happened to you guys? So this is probably the most common crash. I mean, fragment transactions, async operations, network calls, state restore, you name it. Everything we do in the Android applications that is specific to Android development seems to cause these kinds of context leaks. So anyone here thinks fragments are easy to use? Yeah, thought so. I mean, I've been doing Android since like 2009, 2008 something. And when the fragments came, I was like very surprised because I didn't understand it. I thought that was, were they kidding with us? I still don't understand it. So it is really complicated API. There's actually going to be a talk at Google I/O that's called "What the Fragment." So there you go. So even Google thinks they might be able to improve this. So yeah, so anyone had that type of crash? Illegal state exception activity has been destroyed. I think that if you make statistics about the types of crash in Crashlytics or these kinds of crash handling things, this one will be on top. I'm wondering if it's a feature in Android rather than a bug. So it's, you know, despite how much experience we have or whatever we do, we seem to end up in this one over and over again, despite how much tests we have. Because why is this? Well, this is why most of the developers in the world write JavaScript, because you can't have this happening there. Concurrency, that's the main cause for these types of bugs, because concurrency is really, really hard. Now, I think there are some people doing RxJava, having checked the schedule, so I think there are people who are interested in RxJava as well. That is a great thing. It makes it easier to do async or handle concurrency. But it just makes it easier. It doesn't solve all the problems. You still have to deal with this. So reactive frameworks and such, they're great. So start using them if you have a lot of these issues. But there are also tools you can apply. So anyone here use Lee Canary? Great. Those of you who are not using Lee Canary, start doing it today. It's a really good way to detect your existing context leaks. So just do it. Another one of these amazing things coming out of Square. Another thing is annotations. So who here uses the annotations? Good. Why are you not using the annotations, the rest of you? There are lots of these annotations in the support library, like for null checks or stuff like that, but also for making sure that the method is only running on a specific thread. So you annotate a method with worker thread, and if you happen to call this method from your main thread, it will give you a lint warning about that, saying, no, you can't call it here. It needs to be run on a background thread. And there's also the main thread annotations, which works in reverse. You can only call that on the main thread. Add this to your own code where you do these things to make sure that you avoid concurrency issues or running stuff on the wrong thread. It helps you along the way. It makes things easier. There are more annotations that you can use. Also, Android Studio, or rather the IntelliJ suite, has a lot of really cool other types of annotations that you can add. So you should check those out. I know that David, my former colleague from Spotify, he had a really great talk about lint yesterday. Hope you got to see that one. So making your own custom lint checks for your own APIs is a great way to enhance or avoid mistakes. Now, security mistakes. There was a great talk yesterday on, right, where are you? I think I saw you coming in here. Okay, sorry, there was a really good talk about security yesterday. I hope you got to see that one. We tend to address security in the wrong way. Again, Randall Monroe at XKCD, he can make comic strips about anything, and I like how he explains this. So this one actually explains a lot of the mistakes we do with security. Now, I'm going to show two examples. First one is a post from Stack Overflow. So this guy is asking how to encrypt data in his private folder, in this case OAuth keys. Should you encrypt your OAuth keys? There. Is it a good thing? Nobody dares to answer here. No, it's not. You should invalidate all these OAuth keys like within 1 hour, so that the client always have to revalidate his keys. You shouldn't bother about encrypting this. It doesn't make sense. First of all, you have to store the key somewhere, right? And you can't like keep asking the user for password every 5 minutes. Wouldn't work. So if you're thinking about encrypting data in the private folder, do a proper risk analysis of this. So this is a very common question I get when I join projects. It's like, yeah, we need to encrypt this, right? But why? Why? What could happen that if they get this, someone gains a phone? How would they go about to get the data? And then you usually work out that you actually don't need this. So the other mistake people do is this. So Anna talked about this exactly yesterday. And you'd be surprised how many times I've seen this. The first time I saw it, I didn't actually react to it, because I'd seen it before and I never thought about it. But then something bad happened, and we had to deal with it. But after that, I learned that, okay, whenever I see this, I need to address it right away. So over the last 2 years, I have had about 5 to 10 different projects having these issues, having put either the password or the certificate or both into the Git repository. How many people have access to your source code? Is it enough if you just remove the password and just have the certificate there? No, it's not. Neither the certificate, nor the password, nor the alias, anything of those values should be in your Git repo. They shouldn't actually be available to any of the developers. You should put this on your continuous integration server, away from anyone's access, put it behind a firewall, make sure nobody can get access to it, and just trigger release builds with that. This is one of the biggest security issues we have with Android today, in my opinion. Okay, number 7. So picking library. I've written library here, but I'm actually referring to anything third-party, a language or whatever. So the Kotlin talk. Anyone went to the Kotlin talk yesterday? It was a great talk, right? I really liked it. And I know that some of you are using RxJava. Anyone here had a chance to try Agera from Google? It was just released? No, it's very new. It's basically also a reactive library, just focused on Android, so it's a little bit more slim. Do you know you can write Swift code? We can write Swift for Android? Yeah? Would you? A more interesting thing is that since about a year back, you can write Android applications in Go. You can even write cross-platform applications for iOS and Android in Go, either as shared libraries that you can instead of C++, or as full-fledged application using OpenGL or something. Would you do that? Anyone here writing Go code? So, and then we have React Native from Facebook that everybody is like cheering on. Mostly the web developers, because, well, they like JavaScript. It's tricky to know what to pick. Why are you not picking Swift, but you are picking Kotlin? Well, I know that you can explain it to me, but there are so many other examples. Which library do you pick for loading images? What library do you do for, other stuff? What third-party things are you using for crash handling, etc.? It's really hard to decide which one is the right one, or which will cause you to do some lock-in that you have to deal with later that will be very cumbersome. So a long time ago, I learned about these two concepts together. So emerging and disruptive. All technologies that are announced are emerging technologies. They might be new, or they might just be a new take on an existing technology or an existing way of writing code or existing library. But most of the new things that comes out are not disruptive. They don't make a lasting impression. Very few people will use it, etc., etc. It might take a long time before we realize if it is becoming disruptive or not. But there are many ways to look at this. This happens to everyone. Like, look at Nokia. They didn't go down. They didn't choose to join the Android platform initiative, and look where they are today. So choosing not addressing this thing, not looking at all the emerging technologies and not really analyzing everything can be disastrous. And if you, for your project, for your small team of maybe 3 developers, if you don't think carefully when choosing a third-party library or choosing to use some other language, that can make a huge difference for how your application will work in the future, or how much effort you need to put in. Now, another mistake that people do when they start developing an application is choosing which API level. Is anyone still targeting Gingerbread? 1 person. Wow. Let's talk. So everybody give him a hug later, okay? How about the ice cream sandwich? Anyone targeting ice cream sandwich? No, well, a few, okay. Yeah, we can probably stop doing that also. So how many of your users are on KitKat or later? Like, would you say like it's 70%, 80%? Do you know how many users you have on each API level? Do you know how many is that number related to how many who have installed the app, launched it once? Is it your daily average user, daily active usage? Or is it monthly active usage? So it differs. The numbers are very different. So you know, the only statistic we have that we can trust is this one from Google. This is from April. Marshmallow is actually being noticeable. At least it's bigger than Gingerbread. And Lollipop and KitKat are the largest ones. But this is worldwide for all devices that access Play Store. So it doesn't really make sense in your case. In 2015, this was before Marshmallow was launched, the worldwide stats looked like that. Yeah, KitKat on the top there was much bigger than everyone else. The problem here is that this changes over time very fast, and depending on what region you're in, it can change really at different speed. So, like, take India for instance. We would expect India to be far behind on Android versions. Maybe there would we would think that there would be a lot of Gingerbread devices there, or maybe even some other weird things. But it turns out that they are actually often far ahead, much further ahead than when we believe. So our expectations of a certain market is often wrong. I have a friend working in India. He's an Android developer in India, and he says that there is no point targeting the lower API levels anymore. He targets very late ones. Like he goes for API level 19 these days because he still gets enough installs. So remember that when you start developing an app today, and it will take 6 months before you launch, a lot will change in these statistics. So these are things we need to consider, and people usually put their API level too low, making them having to deal with platform issues that we really shouldn't be caring about anymore. So the tips here is like track actual usage, like daily active users, monthly active users, check this. Would it be okay to leave old users behind? Like, just because you bump up the API level doesn't mean that the users on a lower device will just get the app uninstalled. They will still have the application there. And if you designed your version code scheme correctly, you can actually go back and bug fix those later. So there are tricks for doing that. If you want to know more about that, you can come and talk to me later. I will explain. Performing user studies. This is something we rarely do, but when you perform the user studies, you will see that actually people have very cutting-edge phones, often the ones who are interested in using your application. Okay, now we're going to be a bit controversial. Who here uses an iPhone? Nice. Those of you who use an iPhone, do you also use an Android phone? Of course you do, otherwise you wouldn't be here, I guess. But so I mean, I've done this mistake myself. I didn't use an iPhone because I thought I didn't need to. Now my iPhone is not here because my wife took it from me. So, but this is actually really important. You should use the other platforms. And the main reason is, like, iOS users, iPhone users, are constantly more satisfied with their product than the Android users. And why is this? Well, unless you actually use an iPhone and figure out why, and understand that, you will make the same mistakes that make Android users less satisfied with their product. So, get an iPhone. Make sure you use it, not just having lying on desk there. Use it as your main device for a month, just to try it out. Okay, so the final thing is this. Sharing is caring, right? So it's great to be here. I see a lot of local speakers. I think that is awesome. Now, besides doing conferences and doing freelancing, I'm also one of the organizers for an Android meetup up in Stockholm. I'm also part of organizing the droidcon Stockholm conference. And one of my biggest problems is finding speakers. I can't find them. It's really, really hard. I need to go out and chase them down, basically. And this is a problem, because the best way to become really good at something is teaching it. You don't start as an expert, but when you start teaching it, you learn all the tricks much faster. So I learned more about programming teaching university students about different things than I did being a university student in computer science. So remember that. Even helping others will make you better. So this is the map over the current droidcon conferences. There are many other conferences, but I really recommend the droidcon conference because I think it's a great community. There are all over the world right now. They're coming more every time. So now we have 2 in US. There is 1 in Canada. We even have 1 in Dubai. So it's great. Go to more conferences. Start a new meetup if there isn't a meetup where you live. Join a Google developer group. Do all these things to make sure that you participate in the community and help others. It will make a lot of difference for your own profession and your own skills. So that was all from me. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you had a nice session and have a great rest of the day.
Q&A time, right? Any questions for our dear Erik?
I would like to ask, which third-party libraries do you usually use?
Which third-party libraries do I usually use? No. Wow, that's a really tricky question. Of course, it depends on which type of app it is, but the most common thing is basically the libraries from Square that we all know of, like OKHTTP, Retrofit, and stuff like that. Of course, I use RxJava because that's the new black. So that one is comes also with all the other reactive libraries on top of RxJava, RxBindings, RxLifecycle, SQLBrite if you use those. So that's what I use today. I also use Dagger a lot for dependency injection. I write my own libraries to some degrees as well, where there are missing ones. I also write libraries which wrap other libraries, sort of, to make it easier for me to switch them out. Image loading is one thing, for instance. I usually create an interface for image loaders and make a lightweight wrapper above them so that I can change those later, because they come with different pros and cons. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Mostly. And I was wondering, did you try Realm as a storage?
Did I try Realm? So Realm is, for those of you who don't know it, is a persistent solution that lets you basically store JSON data straight off. It's a NoSQL database for Android, and it's very interesting. It has some drawbacks that I don't like. For instance, you had to extend an object from their API, which make your DTOs really heavyweight. It's also the objects can't be used across threads, so that's another disadvantage. So I tried it out. Those things made me maybe decide not to use it. There are other ORM solutions that actually are better, in my opinion. But I think everyone should try it out and see what works for them.
Thanks.
Hi. So you mentioned that, like, for many cases, you can use HTML5 apps instead of like going like using cross-platform tools. But I think I read somewhere that Chrome on Android has really terrible performance loading web apps, while Safari on iPhone is actually doing good. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I don't. Google does. So yeah, but I know what you mean. Yes, there are performance issues in Chrome regarding very heavyweight web apps. But I mean, Google is working. They have a lot of people working on that all the time, and it's getting better and better and better. Now at the same time, people keep adding more stuff, more third-party libraries and such. But I think that the latest initiative by Google called Progressive Web Apps is actually addressing this from a new direction, and it looks very, very promising. Now, not all apps should be web apps, but there are several apps that shouldn't be native apps. I'm thinking news sites are usually like The Verge, for instance. They remove their app from App Store and Play Store and just using a web app instead. So there are many cases where it makes much more sense to have a web app. You should always like consider this, of course.
Thanks.
Any more questions?
Hey there, you mentioned Go and Swift. Did you actually try using them yet for Android?
Yes, I did, with varying success. Swift is a very nice language to write code in. Now, I didn't get it to work more than just a shared library, basically. So I didn't get so far with that one. But I think that it might be an alternative to C++, so to say. Go, on the other hand, is very interesting for game developers, I think. It could make, Go is very nice code to write if you do a lot of concurrency, which might be something you do in many games. So I think it might be relevant in that case. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yes, it does.
Any more questions now? Guess not. Do
Okay.
you see any hands in the air?
No, I don't, but please come find me afterwards. I'd love to talk more with all of you. So, and
Or
share.
now during coffee break. Thank you very much, Erik.